One of the hardest things to wrap your head around when you first start pressing is the fact that it is a strength, a mobility, and a skill task. And when doing beginner's drills, it's very easy to address one of them, but putting them all together is very difficult, and that's what makes up a press. We need to be able to do all the things. The back-to-wall press actually practices all those three things at once if it's done with a finite amount of detail and attention. If it's just up and down for the sake of going up and down, it practices one or two of those things. We start with our hands on the floor, and our back's going to be towards the wall. Now, the distance away from the wall, the more mobile you are, the closer you'll be able to go to the wall. The less mobile you are, the further you'll have to go from the wall. Now, this is one of those things that a couple of centimeters can go from the wrist can do this all day to the wrists are going to go fuck themselves. So we need to find a distance that is sustainable for the wrists, but we can still get an adequate amount of challenge in towards the actual movement. It is completely fine to turn the hands out a couple of degrees, so it's more like thumbs facing forwards parallel to one another, or fingers nearly in a parallel line. But know that hands facing forwards is eventually where we want to get to, because we do need to develop a degree of wrist extension. It's just that we don't want to fuck the wrists up on day one. I'm going to kick up heel to wall, and first thing I'm going to do is go neutral head and bring my shoulder blades and butt to the wall at the exact same time. I'm going to push my back into the wall quite heavily, and then from here I'm going to take the legs as wide as possible, keeping the heels dragging on the wall. I squeeze the glutes and try to get a little bit of extra width before I start pulling the hip flexors on without allowing the glutes to let go. From here I take the toes as low as I can, keeping the tailbone connected to the wall. Then I bring the legs back up, I get them back to the wall, I bring my legs together, I actively elevate at the scap, I push away from the wall, staying in one piece. I then lower back to the wall. Legs as wide as I can. Squeeze glutes, hip flexors. Then I take just the tailbone away and I try to roll down one vertebra at a time, bringing my feet as close to the hands as I can, keeping my feet as close to the wall as possible throughout the entire movement. Once this movement is learned, we can start flirting with the depth. So we do it by doing the exact same thing of taking legs as wide as we can, pulling on the hip flexors and getting just the tailbone to the wall. But then what we want to do is, first thing that we need to do is we need to lose this space between the small of the back and the wall, and we need to keep the tailbone connected and try getting towards a posterior pelvic tilt. Once that's on, then you get used to taking just the tailbone away from the wall and putting it back and going all the way back up, starting again. Once that becomes manageable, you take the tailbone away and then a few extra vertebrae, but not too much. Now the thought here is whatever's connected to the wall is pushed into the wall as heavy as possible. Whatever's away from the wall is far away from the wall as possible, to really exaggerate that rolling and connection of the segmentation of the flexion of the spine. And then we just try to go a little bit lower each time until we're inevitably getting close to or touching the floor each rep. As you start getting lower, the tendency here is to want to swing the legs up. We must always keep the hip flexors on until the tailbone's back at the wall. Then we start taking them away and bring the heels back towards the wall to come up. So whenever we're rolling up and down the wall, the hip flexors are pulled on to keep ourselves in that nice compressed shape. So we're not learning to leverage ourselves off the wall and swing legs. The more I can actively squeeze the hip flexors, the more I can segment the spine, the easier it's going to be for me to get lower without having to destroy the wrists. When pushing away from the wall, everything in me will want to flare out the ribs and use the back of my head to get away from the wall. But whenever I do this, I'm effectively just using a seesaw through the body to initiate the movement, and I'm not understanding how to actually use the trapezius to push the shoulders away from the wall. And if you have a look at a straddle press, the initial part is not just the lean, but the press of the shoulders back underneath the hips to start rolling the spine up. And we definitely want to drill the strength in that component. While learning to roll the spine down and up, you can use a bit of pressure through the back of the head because it will very much help with that active press to have that segmentation. But it's not something that you want to be, if you have a sore neck from it, it's obviously far too much.